Welcome to the PR Essentials Summit series, where the experts reveal how to do PR so that you can do it yourself. Hello, welcome to Is There a Wrong Time to Start PR and what you should do as a startup to prepare. One of the most basic questions before starting a public relations program as a startup is, am I ready? Well, are you? What do you need to be ready for a PR program? What does that mean for you? Today, I'm speaking with Scott Brovsky, an entrepreneur, founder, investor, and startup advisor at UCR, University of California Riverside, mentoring entrepreneurs, tech startups since January 2017. Scott is also a director at EPIC SBDC, mentoring promising startups on the UC Riverside campus and in the regional community of the Riverside and San Bernardino counties in California. Welcome, Scott, and thank you so much for joining me today at the PR Essentials Summit.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here, and thanks for the invite. Lots of exciting stuff going on here in Southern California in the startup scene. So especially in inland California, where we are in Riverside and San Bernardino County area, as you said, which is also known as the Inland Empire region. And excited to talk to you today.
Good. So I'm hoping you can come from like a business perspective. You're an entrepreneur. You've been a part of founding member of a lot of different companies, and we worked together in various capacities for a few years, and NZN Labs to today. And you're very active and passionate about helping tech startups and being involved in the tech startup scene as we've gone through COVID and the pandemic. You're a wealth of knowledge and resources. So I'm very thankful for you, but also I think like you have a lot of information that you could be sharing with these startups in relation to business in general, but of course, leading into the conversation of PR. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk to today. And we talked a lot about this in the past of when should startups really start PR? So it's kind of a little bit of a loaded question, but when do you think fledgling startups, so guys that are kind of going into this for the first time, or maybe even not, what do you think, forget about PR for a moment, but like, what should their first milestones be? Obviously, PR is not the first thing on your list, but what should those first milestones be before they start getting into marketing or PR? What do they need to accomplish before getting to that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, obviously depends on the vertical that you're in, the industry you're in. It would be a different answer if you're a biotech company versus a consumer facing app startup. But in general, what we teach, we have a program that we run here at UCR. It's from the National Science Foundation, NSF. It's called iCore. And it's basically a lean launchpad, lean startup methodology. And so what we teach the startups that we mentor is customer discovery, number one, and then working on early product market fit, number two. So I think before you start thinking about marketing or PR, one thing you want to think about is, have you actually created an MVP of some sort, a minimal viable product? Or if it's a service, do you have it somewhat figured out? We've worked with about 400 startups over the last few years in our program, which is called EPIC SBDC at UC Riverside. And, every founder that comes to us thinks that they're ready to raise capital. And obviously, almost none of them are. And so we really work on some of these early things. And so I think before marketing and PR, working on customer discovery and also trying to figure out some product market fit, early product market fit, basically creating an MVP, iterating on it with your customers is probably the best way to go before you start spending against PR or marketing. So that's kind of the, general answer. But again, it would depend on the vertical. Because if you're a biotech company, you're obviously not going to have an early product that you can iterate on, because you'll have to go through FDA approval and other things before you'll be able to get to that stage. So obviously, that advice would not apply to a biotech startup or many of the clean tech startups we work with. That advice would also not apply. But in any case, that's kind of a general answer.
And I think some of the startups that I talk to, and I'm sure the ones that you work with, also they kind of feel like there's like a chicken and egg situation. They're thinking like, okay, well then how do people find out about us? If we're not doing any PR, how do people find out about us? Why shouldn't I do a press release? So like, I feel like that question is often asked as well. And they want to get some attention from investors. And so PR does play a really good role in that. But I think, again, you have to be somewhere, because also from a PR perspective, you can't really get coverage if you haven't done anything yet.
That's right.
Where do you think, like, so for these people who are like, okay, well, how do I get this first round of attention? And the question I had prepared for you is really more around like, how do I get attention for investment? But it's the same thing for customers. How do they get their first round of attention for customers and investment if it's not coming from PR? What is your advice on getting that pipeline going?
Yeah. So, well, a couple answers. Again, it depending on what vertical the startup's in, but generally, you will want to start doing some early PR tactics pretty much with any startup that you're building. So, for example, we've helped a couple of startups that have gone out for equity crowdfunding, and so obviously different from the Kickstarter, Indiegogo crowdfunding, where you're actually giving up a piece of equity in your company, in your startup, to raise capital. And the ones that have done really well had built an email list, and of not just customers, but potential customers, but also investors, advocates, friends, people. So when they go out then for something like an equity crowdfunding campaign, they have a built-in audience that's interested in them more necessarily. They may not even have a finished product, but they're interested in them. And so I don't minimize the critical nature of having, some type of customer list being built, and whether you're building that organically or you're building that through paid advertising or you're building that through PR, it is important. As far as, from an investor perspective, yeah, I mean, obviously if if an investor is going to do due diligence on a startup, whether it's an angel investor or a venture capitalist, we focus on beyond the friends and family round with our program. So we don't really, get involved in. Obviously, we're not going to try to convince your grandmother or your uncle or whatever to try to invest in the company. That's something that the founders need to do. But after the friends and family round is where our program gets involved, and so we work on both angel investment rounds as well as equity capital from what would be considered earlier seed stage VCs. There's all different kinds of terms these days. Sometimes it's called pre-seed, sometimes it's called seed, but basically pre-series A in the old school way of talking about things is where we focus with a lot of our startups. And obviously, if you're a professional angel investor and you start doing your due diligence and you get some great PR stories for the startup that you're looking at, of course, that's going to be helpful. So the question, though, often becomes is that since most of the startups that we work with are bootstrapped, if they only have a certain amount of capital that they've scraped together, whether it's their own founders' capital or it's from friends and family, like we talked about a second ago, I mean, is it worth spending some money against PR versus your product? Maybe not. So again, it's case by case. And, we have a team of 15 mentors that work with our program to help the startups. And, obviously we would not just give a blanket answer there, but we would evaluate it like, okay, actually, I think you better not spend that money against marketing or PR because your product is not ready for prime time. You don't have any product market fit. And oh, by the way, your customers have not indicated that they even want your product. So, I think you have to kind of step through it.
Well, that actually is a very nice segue into the next question, which is maybe just reiterate what you just said, but what are the check marks that you have to make before you start thinking about marketing and PR? I think before we go into the check marks, I think there is a position for thought leadership too beforehand, because sometimes some of these products and customers need education. And I don't think they should be doing PR, but content creation, I think, is very important. So creating content on their own website. I mean, obviously you have to have a website. I feel like And I know that sounds really obvious to some people, and maybe to some people it doesn't, because they say, well, when can we start PR? I'm like, well, do you have a website that you're happy with? And they aren't. So you definitely have to have a website. But what do you think of the other check marks? And that includes anything on the investor side for a startup, like as a business. And, I'd love for you to just play the devil's advocate, like, no, people that are watching just don't know anything, because it's always better to cover more than less.
Okay.
What are the places that they need to have covered off before they say, okay, well, I want more, and I want to get more people? What are the places that they need to have really nicely fine-tuned before they do that?
Okay. Yeah, that's great. So again, I think, well, first of all, I want to agree with you. I do think that content, especially again, depending on what vertical you're in and what your industry is, but I totally agree, especially for business to business or B2B startups. I completely agree that thought leadership and content marketing is early is better than not. And a lot of times, as you know, we won't name names, but you're working with several of the startups that we mentor with our program. And sometimes it's a struggle because the founders are so busy working to build their product or service, trying to get them to, write a blog or do some type of content, thought leadership stuff that then a professional like you or your team can then go out and get placed. That's not necessarily something that's easy to get them to do when they're just, in the struggle of getting early things done. But outside of content marketing, I think, again, some early checklist stuff. One is, we already talked a little bit about product market fit, but that's a big one. I mean, have you done any testing? Have you talked to any actual customers? Have you gotten any feedback on your early MVP of your product? Is it, what is that feedback? Is it, oh, this is pretty cool, but we're probably not going to want to pay for this, but it's great if it's free? Or is it, yeah, we'd actually pay for this? And then the second thing that a lot of startups that come to us, they have an amazing idea or an early MVP product, but they haven't thought at all about a business model. And so we spend a lot of time working with startups trying to help them figure out, okay, how are you going to actually make money? So, and of course, before you go in front of any investor, you're going to want to have that not necessarily completely figured out, but you'll want to at least have some indication about how you think you're going to do it. And then you need to start testing that. So, product market fit. And then the other thing, in addition to so basically product market fit, revenue idea. And then the third thing is, have you tested any customer acquisition tactics? So for example, I can't tell you how many pitch decks, and I see dozens of pitch decks obviously every week. And I can't tell you how many pitch decks I see, early pitch decks that basically have the PR marketing plan is, we're just going to do a bunch of great social media and everything. We're going to all our customers are come organically, and our product's so amazing that we're not going to have to spend any money on product or on PR and marketing.
Advertising,
If you present that to a professional investor, they'll get laughed out of the room, because that, maybe a one in literally a million startups can grow organically with word of mouth and social, but that's not a business. That's not a plan, right? So. Right. I would say before you start thinking about spending serious dollars on PR and marketing, you'd want to think about, what customer acquisition tactics actually work. So if in your plan for your pitch deck to raise capital, you think, well, we're going to do a campaign on Instagram and Pinterest. Well, have you actually tested on Instagram? Is your customer even on Instagram? Do you know? Are they going to? So I think, most investors are going to want to see that the startup has taken some amount of dollars. And again, depends on the vertical, but typically it's somewhere around $10,000 to $100,000. And they've tested across multiple customer acquisition channels to see and track basically the results, so that then if the investor invests, the investor can be confident that if I put in my, whatever it is, 100,000, 500,000, 2 million, then this startup understands how to grow and acquire more users or customers. So that's one. But again, like I completely agree that, content marketing and thought leadership, especially for B2B startups, is absolutely critical to start to do early.
Well, it's really nice that you brought up this product market fit and the advertising, because A lot of times too, so we don't do this normally, but with crowdfunding campaigns, we have started to do like the pre-vetting period. So we do a test period where our digital marketing team, they actually go and just do ads. So it has nothing to do with PR. Well, I mean, everything's a part of PR these days, but yeah, it has nothing to do with PR. It's really like an ad set on how is the audience responding to price, who's responding, where are they responding, like what are the habits of these people. So we actually, for crowdfunding specifically, we actually confirm through digital marketing campaign. It's called like a pre-vetting campaign, and we do that for like a month to 6 weeks to do exactly what you said, just to kind of validate the market and that they're going to be able to get potential investors. We're actually about to do that with a equity crowdfunding campaign right now. Cool. And then you can also do that with a regular crowdfunding campaign. I mean, you could essentially, if you're doing crowdfunding or you're raising money that way, you can kind of figure out if that crowdfunding is going to work before you even launch the campaign, which I think a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, that early testing is critical. And, and it's just something that investors are going to want to see. So one thing that we have happen a lot with the startups that we mentor is they come to us when they do have again, some of them don't have an MVP, but some of them come to us with an MVP that they've built, whether it's a software product or a service. And the challenge is that they've spent all of their existing, whether it's their own capital or their friends and family money they've raised on creating a product, and then they've left no money for testing what you're talking about. So they've left no money for testing any kind of marketing or PR acquisition campaigns. And I totally agree with you. I mean, that's a critical thing to test, obviously, not just for equity crowdfunding campaigns, but also before you go out to investors, as we talked about a minute ago. So so I think that's a great point. It's excellent point. That it's
I guess that's when I hear a lot of people saying, "Hey, can you do this for free?" or can you take a share of the company? Or and I think that's really important. Maybe that's a good tip to kind of take away from this part of this conversation, is that make sure that you're saving some money for this validation portion.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and if you don't, then figure out a way to raise it. I mean, I started my first startup on credit cards, and that was a long time ago, like in the dark ages of the early internet, but in Austin, Texas. But still, it's like, I can't tell you how many people like startups, especially young founders, are taken aback when they come to me asking for introductions to venture capitalists, and I say, you're not ready. And they say, well, what am I going to do? And I say, well, do you own a house? You can get a loan against your house. Well, I'm not going to do that. Well, okay. How badly do you want to build your startup? Oh, I don't have $10,000 to test a Facebook or an Instagram PR and ad campaign before I talk to investors. Okay. Well, do you have credit cards? Well, yeah, I'm not going to run up my credit cards. It's like, okay, well,
you have to be willing to do something.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that as a founder, you do crazy, risky things that puts your family at risk. And, I'm not saying spend your children's college fund or whatever situation you're in, but at the same time, like, you're most likely not going to find an investor at the angel, again, outside of the friends and family, at the professional angel and professional early stage VC. You're most likely not going to find an investor until you have shown some traction. And where that could be customers, it could be early revenue, it could be if you're a deep tech company, it could be a grant from a federal agency. That's a good proof point of, well, we don't have any customers yet because we're a biotech company, but oh, by the way, NIH and National Institute for Health and NSF or whoever it is, we have 2 SBIRs that we've gotten, small business loans, non-dilutive funding, that's proof. So proof isn't always customers and revenue, but for most B2C, business to consumer and B2B startups, revenue and customers, that is the kind of proof you need. So we do
see a lot more resources coming out, obviously over the last year or so. So it's definitely worth like looking into. I think also investors want to see that you have some skin in the game. So like, if you're not willing to invest in yourself, why should they invest in you too? I think that's a huge thing. Obviously, I've seen that quite a bit, over the years. It's just like, you've got to be able to kind of go out on a limb on this thing. And like you said, nothing crazy risky. You don't put your family at risk, but also if you're not willing to risk anything, then maybe you don't believe in it. It's like almost like you kind of have to show that you kind of are behind your own product.
Yeah. I mean, and it just, despite the fact that there's more capital available now, I mean, this is probably the best time, even during the COVID crisis, as you've probably read and seen, a lot of the early investing there was a hit early on, but when the markets came back, there's still a lot of activity. So right. There's never been a better time to try to raise capital. One thing I'll say though is that also, a lot of startups, they shouldn't raise capital because they're not a venture fundable business or an angel investor fundable business. And so I think, again, most of the founders we work with believe that they are, but I think it helps to walk through what the investors are looking for with the founders, especially first-time founders. Obviously, serial entrepreneurs already know this if they've raised capital, but in any case, walking through it, like, okay, so you think that, whatever, $30K a month is for the next 2 years is great. And, that is a great business potentially if you have a small number of employees, but, most investors would consider that a lifestyle business. And so that's not an investable business. So if you have $30K a month that's growing at 10 or 15% month over month, then you're in a different conversation and you're talking, both angels and VCs will be interested in talking to you if you're growing. But a lot of startups, can build to a certain level, and the growth just isn't fast enough for professional investors to be interested. And so that's just something that the founders will have to either learn the hard way, or they can work with, people who have experience raising capital and can give them some advice. So, but anyway, yeah, it's kind of interesting. And of course, as a founder, you should be excited that your product is amazing and you should think you're ready to raise capital. But then I would just say that, one thing when you do work with mentors or advisors, their reputation is at stake with the investors. So if a mentor or an advisor says, we really recommend you do A, B, and C before I can introduce you to any investors, they're not, I don't say that because I wish I could tell every startup that comes to us, oh yeah, I've got 20 investors I can introduce to you, but that's just not the reality. Because if I introduce a bunch of startups that aren't ready for investment, then the investors will stop taking my emails and calls. So, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I'm not trying to be difficult with the founders, but it's just like, look, you're not ready to raise capital. And these are the things you need to do beforehand. And a lot of them will say, well, you're wrong. And they'll go away. And then I oftentimes will hear from them in 2, 3, 4, 6 months. Then they'll come back and say, so what was that you were saying about what we need to do to be ready to raise capital? And I'll say, okay, let's get back into that discussion. But anyway, so.
No, that's funny. I think everyone has a learning curve. Like you said, people who've done this more than once, they kind of know the deal after a while, but it's a learning curve. So, okay. So let's say you're ready to do PR. You've come to a point where you're kind of in that position. You're ready to kind of do a little bit of expansion or grow a little bit, or you want to show the investors who invested in you already that you have some legs. So I guess my question is for you, and I've seen a lot of positive reinforcement, and I've seen a lot of people who don't care. But how do investors, and maybe it's investors who, embrace PR versus not, I don't know. How do investors who've already invested in your company, how do they typically view PR activities, and how important is getting the name out there for them once they've invested in the company? Because I've seen a lot of startups feel pressured to get obviously big news. And I've seen other startups be like, oh, well, it's not a big deal, but I want to do something for the investors. So what do you think, from an investor perspective, the role of PR is for them, and how important is it really? Or is it something that, when you're really ready to go, that's what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think again, it depends on your industry, but in general, I would say that we talked about it a little bit earlier. I think that early PR, a couple of early PR hits can be very helpful when you're trying to raise capital. We already talked about that, but you asked about, post investment. I
Mhm.
think PR is not as important post investment for investors as it is for attracting talent.
Right.
So
Okay.
I think, for most startups, the biggest thing that PR does for you is get you on the radar of talent. And as you know, it's incredibly hard to find and attract talent to a startup, even if you're funded. And of course, prior to being funded, it's even harder, which a lot
Yeah.
of our startups in our region are in this situation where they haven't raised capital yet, but they still need to attract talent. So yeah, I think that the more positive PR you have, obviously, again, not to the point where like, the CEO or the co-founding team is going, and again, this is pre-COVID, but going from conference to conference and event
Right.
to event, and then forgetting about building the startup and attracting customers, et cetera. So there's a balance there. But yes, I totally agree that some early PR is beneficial for a startup, and it's mainly, I think, for attracting talent.
That's a really good point. We worked with this company that was in the Midwest, and they, initially we had started doing PR, and he really, really wanted to get into high-profile publications. And then when we went back and we were like, okay, well, we got a couple of high-profile because you raised a really nice round of funding. That's great, but what exactly do you want to do with your PR? And I think a lot of people forget to answer that question. And when they said, "Oh, well, we need to hire," and I was like, "Well, this national PR is not going to help you hire locally. So we need to do some localized PR. We
Mhm.
need to do a little bit more about the company culture." So there is like fine tuning your message for the types of results that you want, and I think a lot of people miss that. Right? If you are trying to attract talent, it's a different kind of PR that you're doing than if you're trying to attract investors or if you're trying to attract customers. And
Right.
so I think that's a dynamic that a lot of startups kind of miss. And I like that you mentioned attracting talent because the better talent that you have, the better PR story you have for your like company as a brand too. And I think often that goes like a little bit misguided, especially like what is the type of PR you should be doing in the beginning? It should be attracting talent, attracting investment, not necessarily promoting the CEO and how great they are always, but really promoting more of a company culture versus an individual person, which sometimes happen where they're doing self promotion because it's their baby versus company or like technology promotion because that's what you're trying to support.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I think, yeah, obviously knowing, and that's why when it comes down to it, it's good to have help, whether it's external, working with an agency like you guys,
Yeah.
or internal if you get to the size where you're able to build your own PR and marketing group or team. Either way, but yeah, I mean, what are your goals is obviously a key thing, and one thing that you know. Um, we hear a lot from especially first time founders is again, it's similar a little bit to the fundraising kind of thing, but they if someone says I don't understand why our launch of our beta software isn't, why won't TechCrunch return my email kind of thing, or what other big outlet if you're in tech you're
Right,
going
right.
after. And it's like, well, they see a lot of these, and so that's why I think it helps to work with a PR professional who has the relationships, and as you've done with a number of the startups that we mentor, you say, hey, I don't think your story's quite ready for this outlet, but this one
Right.
would be interested in it. And so you're still getting PR. You just might not be getting the Wall Street Journal or whatever the dream is that as a founder you think you should be. You're not on the cover of Forbes yet, kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
but maybe you will be soon. So I just think that it's always good to have other people who do this for a living to kind of help guide the founders, to what the realities are of the situation. Because I mean, it's a waste of time to spend, weeks or hours or days or whatever it is, hammering on people on outlets for a story when it's not even like
You're not
in the
there.
realm of possibility that that's going to
Yeah.
happen. So you might as well like
And
target it, like you
you're just
said.
annoying them anyway.
Well, yeah, and then if you get too persistent, then yeah, then you may not get the story when you should be getting the story. So yeah, it's a
Right.
tough, it's a fine line. Just like in investors, there's a fine line between being persistent and being passionate, and then you probably don't need to email the investor like every couple of hours asking why haven't you written a check or something. And
Right.
not that I've actually seen some founders, I've heard from investors, some founders can get a little crazy there, but in most cases, most of the founders are pretty cool, and they're usually pretty smart about how they interact with the press and investors. But in general, it is good to have somebody who has, I mean, how long it's taken you, how long? I mean, years to build the relationships that you and your team
Right.
have with press. And so to think that as a new founder or a new startup, you know, that's
Just
just it's
dive
worth.
right in there.
Yeah, just dive right in there, and I just think it's great. And then also, like you said, putting together a plan for and it all changes. It's just like your marketing spend is going to change, as we talked about earlier, based on what's working and what's not, and what you're testing and tracking. But that'd be another thing that I think, just another quick aside, that a lot of
Yeah.
startups that come to us don't necessarily have a good handle on, and that's tracking everything. And so I know you're obviously a fan of
Yes.
tracking PR results, but from a marketing PR perspective, you've got to build the tech stack. If you're a software product, you've got to build the tech stack into the product that's going to do the kind of tracking across all the different things we mentioned, and do it well, so that like, okay, this PR campaign was a massive success because it drove this outcome and this outcome. And this marketing campaign we did was a success because we got this, and this, as opposed to just shotgunning a bunch of spend across a bunch of different, because that happens, with a lot of first time founders when they first raise their money as well, if they've never actually built and run
Right.
a PR and marketing campaign. So, but anyway, yeah. So
We do have a awesome panel or discussion on measurement. So
oh, cool.
yeah, that everyone should tune into the measurement. But this conversation is basically a basis for this whole summit. Was really just to make sure that startup founders and marketers and small entrepreneurs, they're well informed about the process and what they need to know. Because I think, over years and years of working with startup companies, like the less you know, the more detrimental it is for you, but also for the team that you end up working with later, whether it's marketing, PR, social media, whatever. If you don't understand the basics of what PR is supposed to do for you, when you should start, then you can be misguided. And I've come across so many people who've said, oh, well, I had a really bad PR experience, or I had a really bad marketing experience. And then it's really hard to work with those people because they already feel so bad about it, that they are a little bit more closed off on trying new ideas, pushing the envelope, thought leadership, all that stuff. So, the basis of this summit was really to make sure that you're well informed, the audience is well informed, so that they can make educated decisions about the PR and marketing that they want to do. And that way they won't feel so like caught off guard when something happens. They know what to expect.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. One other quick thing I'd recommend to
Yeah.
first time founders is that, again, there honestly, I there are so many resources in terms of programs like ours, EPIC SBDC at UCR, and others, great ones, and all across the country. There's so many mentors and advisors and people who are there to help you. I would just say, we have, I can think of just, I'm not going to name names of startups, of course, but I can think of 4 or 5 startups right off the top of my head that hired an early marketing PR person without really ever having had experience. Like maybe they were a technical founder, or maybe they came out of research out of a lab, and they hired a marketing person. And that was, as you said, that relationship as the first hire didn't work out because that person wasn't the right fit. So what I've been recommending to the founders is that they basically try to find a mentor or an advisor who has, I used to run a global marketing team, basically international team at Disney. We launch products globally. So I and others can basically interview with or or in addition to your interview with the person to see if they're a good fit, because it's just like anything else. Just like I wouldn't want to, I wouldn't want to hire a CTO without talking to some people with a technical background, because I would probably not hire the right person if I were doing another startup. You just really
get some insights from other people.
Exactly.
And there's a fit for everybody, right? Like it's not, everybody's not for everybody. Our agency is for particular types of people. There's other agencies for different verticals, different niches. Find the one that works for you. But I also agree, Scott, a lot with what you're saying about getting a mentor, and finding someone who has maybe been through this process before, because then they can also guide you through like the timing and like, hey, hold up, like, don't do this yet. Like, you really need to have a website or don't do this. You need to have a business plan first, or you need to have a pitch deck. Like, I have found that like startups that have a solid, like final pitch deck and some messaging, and obviously a website, it doesn't have to be final. We always can work on the messaging there, but like they have to have like a really definitive idea of what their messaging is and like the direction they want to go in. They have to have a strong idea before we could even consider working with them. Now, the better that is, the better the relationship can be. The farther along you are, the better it is for PR, obviously. I think there's no too late to start PR, but there is a too early for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the other thing is that, and when I can talk about this offline with founders, but the other thing we see a lot of is giving up too much equity to early advisors who don't necessarily add any value to your company, or they may be nice people, but they, and so if any of the founders have any questions about kind of what is the kind of industry practice for the amount of equity you give up for advisors, feel free to ping me and I'll walk through that. But for many mentor programs like ours, for example, we don't charge anything, and we also don't take any equity. So we're basically grant funded, and then supported by the SBA and the governor's office, which is called GoBiz in California. And then we're also supported by UCR and then some other corporate donors. So, there are a number of programs, and I'm also not saying that, you shouldn't. There are also great mentors who do take payment as consultants, or who will want to have some equity, but just be careful, because this is again another podcast or episode, but I can't tell you how many capitalization tables I've seen where you've got like 4 or 5 different people who didn't really add that much value, but they end up having like 10 or 12 or 15% of the company because they were helping out early. But anyway, just as a founder, be really careful about that when you're bringing advisors, paid or equity compensated advisors into your company.
I love that tip, because also like it is sometimes worth just paying somebody, instead of just giving away parts of your company. As I can't tell you how many times I've been offered equity and I don't take it, but unless I'm connected to them somehow, but it's like, do you know what you're saying? Right. It may seem easy to pay somebody with that way, but again, you get caught in these traps, and I think it's almost easier to get $10,000 from your sister or something like that.
Right. No, that's a great point.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, okay, so how can people find you? Obviously, I should have some connection, some links to you in here somewhere, and obviously, you guys can email us at info@thesilvertelegram.com if you have any questions or need somebody's contact info. But how can people find you if they want to connect with you or ask you a question or anything like that?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm the only Scott Brovsky on LinkedIn, so it shouldn't be too hard to find me. On Twitter, I'm just @Brovsky, which is my last name, which is BROV as in Victor, SKY. And then our EPIC SBDC program, it's EPIC and then SBDC.com. And again, we're also part of a bunch of other amazing programs at UCR that help entrepreneurs that are, beyond what we do. We also have, we run the only venture capital fund in our Inland Empire region, which is called Highlander Venture Fund. So I can get you more information on that. We have 2 incubators that we lead. One's in downtown Riverside called Excite, and the other is a wet lab incubator we just opened on campus. So basically we have a whole kind of, idea to raising capital kind of program that we've built at UCR with a bunch of amazing people on our larger team. So get in touch, and we'll get you some help and some mentoring.
Thank you so much. I definitely want to vouch for this because they do have like some awesome resources. They have amazing startups that are coming out of here. So if you are someone who just even has a question, I would just recommend going over there, asking questions. You never know what kind of resources you can get from them. But yeah, their group is awesome. So thank you so much. This is so informative. I think this is a great starting point for everyone this morning. So thank you, Scott. And I will have resources, and we'll follow up with all of the different panel discussions for people who attended with the information. So you guys have all of that. And you can also, of course, follow him on LinkedIn and Twitter. And he should be tagged in some of my posts. So if you find me, you could probably find Scott. So thank you again so much for your time. I think this was amazing and a great starting point for any startups or entrepreneurs that are looking to get into marketing or even just start raising capital. Like, there are some basic steps you need to do before you even think of the marketing side. So
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for doing this forum. It's very needed. And I hope that all the founders and startups that we mentor in our program will take the time to maybe, if they can't do it live, at least watch on YouTube all the different guests, because you have some amazing guests that are coming up, and excited. I'm excited personally just to see what they have to say as well. So thanks for putting this together, and we appreciate it. The community appreciates it.
Great. Awesome. Well, have a great day, and see you guys in the next panel.
All right. Take care. See ya.